But we begin tonight with the 8th anniversary of the attacks on the United States on September 11th, 2001. This year, the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks is being marked by conservatives marching on Washington in what they're calling the 9/12 movement. The 9/12 movement was conceived and, in a sense, is being led by this guy.
You know, it took me about a year to start hating the 9/11 victims' families. It took me about a year. And I had such compassion for them, and I really, I wanted to help them, and I was behind, let's give them money, let's get started, all of this stuff. And I really didn't, all the 3,000 victims' families, I don't hate all of them. I hate probably about 10 of them. But when I see, 9/11 victim family, on television or whatever, I'm just like, oh, shut up. I'm so sick of them.
That's commentator Glen Beck speaking on his talk radio show before he got his current gig as a TV host on the Fox News channel. Mr. Beck is now promoting the 9/11 anniversary as a rallying point for what he calls his 9/12 movement. And at Fox News, he's using the imagery of the 9/11 attacks, the smoking towers and wreckage of the World Trade Center, to promote a 9/12 march on Washington that is set to take place tomorrow. In other words, Mr. Beck has decided to form a movement around 9/11 to try to capture what we as a country felt after 9/11, presumably minus the whole hating the victims' families thing. When Mr. Beck and thousands of his followers march on D.C. tomorrow, it's still a little unclear as to what exactly they will be marching against or for. Today, Dave Weigel at the Washington Independent reports that organizers hosted what they called an intellectual ammunition pre-Tea Party strategy workshop, which armed participants with quotes from Ayn Rand books. So maybe this is a 9/11 march for utopian capitalism based on books that even the most ardent conservatives usually grow out of after freshman year. Beyond the laying in of intellectual ammunition, other kickoff events for the 9/11 march can give us a further sense of what it is these folks are marching about.
Last night, we heard our president address this country. We were listening for specifics. We were listening to hear something new, and we did not hear that.
He lied! He lied! The man at the podium there not getting much of a word in edgewise between the screams that the president lied, he's a liar, liar. That man was Republican Congressman Eric Cantor of Virginia. The liar, liar, liar yelling, which I predict you will hear a lot of at the event this weekend, is of course a tribute of sorts to South Carolina Republican Congressman Joe Wilson. His "you lie" outburst at President Obama during the president's address to Congress is apparently becoming the right's new drill baby drill, sort of. As you can tell from the podium at which Mr. Cantor is standing, a main organizer of the 9/12 march this weekend is FreedomWorks. FreedomWorks is the ostensibly grassroots, corporate-funded organization headed up by former Republican House Majority Leader and until very recently D.C. lobbyist Dick Armey. The march is also sponsored in part by a group we touched on last night's show. They are the National Association of Rural Landowners, or NARLO. At NARLO's website, you're informed that the Second American Revolution has just begun. Join it or buy a gun because you are going to need it. Just this summer, NARLO posted online a video forecasting massive civil unrest, secession of the states, and then, yippee, a new American Civil War. This is the way that the conservative movement is commemorating the anniversary of 9/11 this year. For context and for contrast, this is the sort of thing that the administration is doing to commemorate the anniversary of 9/11 this year.
Every day, our brave troops and their families stand up for us.
For years, we've asked so much of so few.
Now we have a chance to serve these heroes.
To give time, offer comfort, or lend a hand.
To ease the burden on a military family.
Let's honor their service by volunteering ours.
In mainstream politics, that new PSA you just saw, that's the sort of thing that's considered an appropriate political act to key to the 9/11 anniversary. There isn't much about 9/11 that's appropriate for politics, but that sort of thing, That's considered sort of an appropriate mainstream response. But in conservative politics today, 9/11 is instead being seen as an occasion for a march on Washington that is co-sponsored by an organization that's calling for the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. It may sound like an extreme description. In any rational understanding of the range of American politics, it is quite extreme. But it's important to know about American politics right now that the conservatives attending these rallies aren't necessarily just the extreme. That was Eric Cantor, who you saw addressing a kickoff rally for the 9/12 movement. He's the second-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, standing at the Freedom Works podium at the 9/12 March kickoff event, receiving the "You Lie" serenade as he rails against the president. In Beltway common wisdom, Eric Cantor is supposed to be the poster boy for Republican reasonableness, the counterweight to the fringe. Republican Congressman Mike Pence of Indiana is seen as a potential Republican presidential candidate in 2012. He is one of the scheduled speakers at the march on Saturday. Now, Mr. Pence is considered to be one of the more conservative potential GOP presidential candidates in 2012, admittedly. A man who is supposed to be the big moderate among the Republican 2012 hopefuls is Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. Mr. Pawlenty is not scheduled to be at the 9/12 march, but he did make news this week for continuing to push the deathers theory about health reform on MSNBC this morning, and for yesterday declaring himself a 10ther, arguing that maybe states should consider seceding from any federal health reform effort. In a conference call sponsored by the Republican Governors Association last night, Governor Pawlenty endorsed Texas Governor Rick Perry's call for state sovereignty in the face of horrible federal overreach, like health reform. Like Mr. Cantor, Governor Pawlenty is the guy who is supposed to represent moderation in the current Republican Party. Moderation in the current Republican Party now apparently encompasses advocating or flirting with the idea of states seceding from the Union, disestablishing the country, in other words. If this counts as moderate, what counts as extreme now? Actually, don't answer that. Joining us now is Mike Lux. He's the co-founder and CEO of a consulting firm that's called Progressive Strategies. Mr. Lux, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel.
The reason I wanted to talk to you today about Congressman Joe Wilson yelling at the president and the March on Washington for the 9/11 anniversary this weekend is because you wrote at Huffington Post today that these developments on the right should be seen as sort of a modern variant of a specific kind of historical conservatism. You called it Calhoun conservatism. What do you mean by that?
Well, John C. Calhoun, the senator from South Carolina, ironically, back in the 1830s to 1850s, was the founder, really, of this modern conservatism. He married the idea of states' rights with a very virulent, racist, patriarchal conservatism, and basically said states, have the ability to do whatever they want to do, whenever they want to do it. They can secede from the Union. They can nullify laws that are passed by the federal government. They can ignore the Bill of Rights if they want to. They can do whatever they want to do.
Do you think that this enthusiasm for secession that we're seeing now, not just from Governor Rick Perry, but also from supposed moderates like Governor Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota, do you see it then as not a random offshoot of other forms of extremism we're seeing right now? Do you see it as central to this type of conservative philosophy?
It is central to this type of conservative philosophy. I mean, Ronald Reagan, back in the 1980 campaign, kicked off his general election campaign by going to Philadelphia, Mississippi, a tiny little town far away from a media market in a state that he was going to win easily, and that was the town where Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodwin were murdered. And he gave a speech on extolling states' rights, the old John C. Calhoun states' rights. His quotes could have come out of John C. Calhoun. This conservatism is very much a part of the modern Republican Party.
But in terms of trying, I think that states' rights, I think you're right that it does surface in conservatism over time and time again. But what we're seeing right now, I'm trying to tie together the different surprising and radical seeming things that we're hearing from conservatives right now. It's secession, it's this 10th Amendment stuff. It is the birther thing, the idea that the president is not legitimately the president. And it's also a form of tactical extremism and sort of disrespect toward federal authority. If there's a fundamental belief that secession is a good idea, the sort of extremism around states' rights, is there a connection between that and these other things? A basic idea that the federal government is an illegitimate source of authority right now?
Oh, absolutely. We're not seeing this talk of secession come up by accident. This is what these folks have always believed, but they're talking about it now with a new president who they think is a terrible liberal, and they're raising it right now because it really appeals to their base. The right-wing Republican base, which dominates the primary elections for the Republican Party, they love this stuff. They love disrespecting the president. They love disrespecting the federal government. They hate the government. And it's become really almost sociopathic.
It is difficult, I have to say, to see this sort of anti-government, anti-U.S. in the sense of the secession stuff being against the country, staying the country, tied to the 9/11 attacks, which were an attack